Hey there. If you don't know who I am, which most of you probably do not, hi, I'm Question. I'm an OCE Sea of Thieves Day 1 player who enjoys both PvP and PvE. I mainly play on sloops and brigs, but sometimes galleons as well. When I come up against others, they usually tend to ask, what any tips do you have for helming? And that's why I'm making this video, so I can just link it and then I don't have to tell them in person. The things I'll be going over are, what is your role and how to perform it on certain ship types, the do's and don'ts of helming, and a few tips and tricks to help you enable your teammates. Helming in Sea of Thieves is like playing support in Overwatch. That might sound a bit strange, but just let me explain why that is. Like an Overwatch support, a Sea of Thieves helm, your main role is to enable your teammates for cannon angles and boards, so you can keep pressure on the enemy team and end up winning the fight. On sloops and brigs, you also have the secondary role of bilge to keep your ship alive so your teammate can give as much pressure to the enemy as possible. As the helm on the smaller ships, you are also anti-board, meaning you stop the people from boarding you while your teammate is the one who boards the other enemy. On a galleon, however, the flex will stop the anti-boards while you make sure you have crew management and keep angles for your team. The main thing about being helm, however, is shot calling. Making sure that your ship is in the right position at the right time and your crew is doing the right things at the right time. Otherwise, you might get one thing wrong and that could screw up the entire battle for you and your team. On the smaller ships, for instance, try to make sure you call this out when you're bilging, so then your teammate knows that you are not on the helm, and if the angle needs fixing, that they can let you know it needs fixing, or they can fix it themselves while you're bilging. That being said, however, the number one important thing you want to do to enable your teammate is give them angles in the first place. No point in them being on a cannon if they can't hit the enemy. If your crew is in a good position and you only have minor damage to the hull, don't worry about bilging mid-fight, because the angle might be more important to keep the pressure off you and your ship. Just grab a courtesy bucket every now and then. This way, you're still staying afloat on the fly, while also keeping pressure on the enemy, which also might force them to bilge when you don't have to, which gives you a major advantage in the fight. I know most people know this tip, however some people might be new to the game considering around Christmas time just went. Raising your sails will give you a tighter turn because you have less momentum to go forward, and so you can get angles sharper in mid-fight. As a helm, there are other small things you can do to help your teammates, as using certain ammo types in the cannon at certain times and telling them how close they are to hitting, as in, do they need to go higher for their shots or do they need to go lower for their shots? And then you might ask, well, what cannon type should my cannoner use in certain situations? When your ships are broad to broad, meaning both ships have an angle, your cannoner should be prioritizing things that will keep pressure on the enemy to stop them from cannoning back. Stuff like standard cannonballs, blunderbombs, and certain curses that affect players or their ability to shoot back. When an enemy player ship is nosing you, which we'll get into in a second, you should be prioritizing stuff that will immobilize the crew. So cannonballs again can hit their masts, but also chain shots and certain other curse cannonballs that affect the ship's movement in some way. Now that we've gone over what you should do when, how you should do it, and what your role implies, we'll go over some major do's and major don'ts as a helm. The first thing we'll get into is nosing. Never do it. It's not a good idea. You're just gonna die. That's just what's gonna happen. Most of us have heard ram strat, best strat, but trust me, ram strat is no longer best strat anymore. Now the second question you probably have for me is, what is nosing in the first place? Some of you might already know, but if you do not, basically it's when the front of your ship, the bow, is pointing straight into the enemy's broadside, their cannons, so you can't shoot back and they can keep pressure on you freely. This can get you killed very fast and can screw you over in a battle, and it's exactly what bad helms do a lot. I already went over it a little bit, but your number one priority as a helm is to enable your teammate by giving them cannon angles. You want to be able to shoot the enemy more than they can shoot you, or at least minimum the same amount. My final do and don't is, don't stand there doing nothing just watching the battle happen. You're not a spectator, you're a part of the crew. Even if it's steering the wheels slightly, or patching that tier 1 that could be patched while you're mid-battle even though the crew isn't shooting back, just do something. If your crewmate is keeping it locked down and you've got not much else to do, use a sniper rifle. They might be shooting back at you, and if you can hit a snipe on the enemy cannoneer, it either forces them to get off cannon because they need to heal, or they take the second shot out of your sniper which kills them, Or the third option, you hit them and the cannonball hits them, which kills them and stops cannon pressure on your ship, which is major. Now we're up to the final part of the video, which is just general tips and what you should be doing at certain times. If the battle has just begun, major priority, get angles first. That is what you want to do. Even if you have to turn hard left and raise sail a bit to get angle, you should do it anyway to slow yourself down, but to get that sharper turn on the enemy. If it's not looking good for you and your team, you've got a few holes, your mast is damaged or even demasted, and your wheel's broken, you need to force the reset. You need to get that mast up if it's down, and prioritize moving out of the battle while your other crew is building and maybe defending the ladder. Getting out of the battle alive, waste their supplies that they've just used on you, maybe anchor balls, maybe chain shots, and you get to reset the battle and start over. Now, if the enemy crew is good, they're not just going to let you reset for free. That's just dumb. Why would they let you get out? Ways to stop people from keeping pressure up from cannons is, once again, you can snipe them off cannons so they have to heal. One teammate can be building and the other can be defending and trying to get them off cannons with blunderbombs and stuff like that. But you just want to reset, because then once you're at an equal playing field, you have an equal chance of killing the enemy as much as they do you. Now, if you're at the opposite end of the scenario, they're demasted, their wheel's broken, they've got some holes. If you're a duo, you most likely want to try and keep some pressure on and then send a boarder out, while you act as a solo on a sloop and keep pressure. On the bigger ships, obviously send boarders and then your crew can still manage your ship, but it just scales depending on crew size. Alright, here's the general tips part of the video, where, some minor things to give you the upper hand in battle. Where your boat is facing. That might sound strange, but you have a compass next to your wheel, and there's a reason for that. Waves in Sea of Thieves start from the northwest end corner of the map, and they travel southeast. You do not want to go over and under the waves, as this will make the cannon shots go up and down and make it really hard to hit shots. Now, if you go the opposite directions, northeast and southwest, you actually end up riding those waves, so the cannon doesn't move much, depending on how fast your ship is, of course. But it makes it 10 times easier to shoot from a cannon when you're heading northeast and southwest, because there's not much up and downness of the cannon while you're sailing. Obviously, between those two extremes is the middle ground. North, east, south and west. Waves are generally alright. It's not too hard, so keeping those directions isn't too bad either. It will make it a little bit harder, but not by a drastic amount. Sometimes having your sails raised isn't always the best idea. Say you're in broad to broad and you're going slower than the enemy. They're going to travel past your broadside and you're going to have to constantly adjust angle. So either sometimes you want to match their speed, or be the opposite crew and have your sail fall down and try and get in front of them to force them into nosing you, or for them to change their angle. Now this tip is specifically for a brigantine. Personally, when a game starts in this new PvP stuff, I get my two crewmates to raise front and we use back sail. So when we're fighting, they don't have to raise front and keep pressure off the enemy. They can use both their cannons, while I can change the angle of the boat by raising back myself. Considering, like a sloop, the backmast on a brigantine is right next to the helm, making it easy for me to manage while my crew can focus on their jobs and I can focus on mine. On a galleon, you've got much finer roles, so people are doing much nicher things since there's more of you. However, most of the time when you're in a battle, you don't really want to use mid-sail on a galleon, because the turning circle on a galleon is already horrendous enough as it is, and raising mid fixes that by around 50%, and your turning angle is much better during battle. Using full sail on a galleon is not usually a good idea, but sometimes you might need to, like stated before, to get in front of the enemy. So on a galleon, usually you'd probably want bilge and flex to raise mid, considering it is your most hindering, game-changing mast, while you can use back to raise by yourself because it's only a smaller sail, and sometimes mid-battle you might want to get one of your crewmates to raise front, considering they're smaller sails. Another general random tip that most people don't know on bigger ships, this includes brigantine and galleon, basically ships with more than one mast, depending on which mast is lowered is depending on how the boat turns, and I'll explain that in English. What I mean by that is, we use the brig for an example because it's only got the two sails. If you have front lowered and back raised, the back end of the boat is going to turn more predominantly than the front. And vice versa, if you're using back sail, then the front of the boat is going to turn left or right more than the back is. It's more like the sail that's down is like the anchor of the boat, or like the center point of where it's going to turn, and then the rest of the boat turns with it. So same thing with the galleon, but since you've got more mass, you've got more opportunity, we'll say. If you use just mid-sail, then your boat's going to turn equally each direction. But if you raise front but have mid and back down, your boat's going to turn slightly more at the front. But if you have, say, front and mid raised, then the boat will most likely turn more to the left than it would if you had front and mid down. That's more of the general tips that I could think of, but the main role you always want to remember as a helm is you are the shot caller. Once again, you've got to make sure your boat's in the right spot at the right time, everybody's doing the right thing at the right time, and you want to trust your crew. If you don't trust your crew to do something and you give them that order in the first place, then you might as well not even give them the order. It doesn't make sense. So just make sure you trust in your crewmates and their capabilities, and you can be a strong team together on any ship type. Well, that's the general gist of my guide and how I think when I'm helming on my certain ships. But if you want any more guides on, say, cannons, bilge, flex, or any other type things like boarding and how to deal with multiple people at the same time, just let me know. I'll make some if you want it. And I'll give you some tips and tricks for that too. Have a good one, peeps. This video, I hope it helped you, and we get some better helmsmen on the seas that will stop nosing broadsides. Don't do it. Stop it. I know you're thinking about it. Ram strat is not best strat. Stop it. Alright, catch us later.